Yeah, I feel like I have to go with Michigan here.
Finally, the defending national champ.
Right. How many times did the defending national champ end up fifth on a power ranking?
Welcome to Until Saturday, part of the Athletics Podcast Network. My name is Chris Vannini. I'm joined here by Scott Dochterman, Cameron Teague-Robinson, and we've got our Big Ten preview edition. It's preview season. We're going to be going through the Power Four conferences, as well as some other stuff as we get going into August here. Cam and Scott are here to help with a comprehensive breakdown of the new look Big Ten, which is a ridiculous 18 teams now in 2024. Our approach to the season previews is going to be a little bit different than the past, maybe different than some other places do it. Instead of just going down team by team, we're going to do a little bit of a draft here. We're each going to draft a select group of Big Ten teams, and based on that, it will kind of create our order, and we'll go through team by team what we like and what we don't like. The draft results will then essentially create a power ranking of the conference. So we're kind of mashing it together, calling it a power draft preview. Scott, Cam, thanks for being here. Both of you were in Indianapolis last week at Media Days. Scott, as our kind of resident big picture Big Ten guy, how do you feel about the conference this year? Kind of the most unique year we've ever had in this century-old conference.
I think for the first time in maybe several years, it feels like things have settled down a little bit for the Big Ten. When we've had Jim Delaney passing the torch to Kevin Warren, and then you had COVID, and then you've had multiple rounds of expansion, although they both came to fruition here. Well, Friday will be the official day when they join the league, and switching from divisions to a divisionless structure to the new playoffs. I think now everything is kind of focused forward and mostly on the field. I think it's kind of fun to see it that way. It's going to take some time to get used to it. But overall, I like the direction that the Big Ten is. And then in Indianapolis, it wasn't necessarily there wasn't a lot of news there, but it was just really fascinating to see how the teams were going to react to this much bigger Big Ten.
Cam, how was Indianapolis for you? And as someone who covers one of the top programs in the country, what do you feel about the Big Ten and the top of the league now that has added Oregon and USC and Washington, who just played for a national championship?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I think especially with the way Oregon's trending right now, especially recruiting wise. I mean, Oregon's set to be Big Ten power for a very long time. I think that's good for. I mean, like I cover Ohio State, so it's very good for Ohio State. I mean, it's just another marquee game on the schedule, especially when people talk so much about maybe the Big Ten isn't as strong as obviously the SEC or things like that. So I think it's good for the conference. I mean, you're looking at potentially on any given year getting maybe 4 teams in. I think that's a dream scenario for the Big Ten. So I think it's great. It makes a lot more interesting stories. With media days being 3 days this year, you got to talk to a lot more people. And I just think it's more characters, more personalities. You can never go without more personality and more characters in college football.
Yeah. So we'll get into each team. We'll talk about kind of where they're at, where they want to go, and those types of things. But as we start this draft, we're going to spin a digital wheel to determine our draft order. It's going to be a snake draft. The person who selects last in each round will start the next round with the first pick. And we'll have some maybe superlatives at the end of the show, players of the year and whatnot. Producer Cam has the wheel queued up for us. So let's see who gets the first pick in our draft. It's me. I'm going to get number 1. I'm going to, congratulations to me. I'm always like last in our fantasy drafts. Let's see who's going to be number 2. Let's spin that one more time. Oh, that was close. Cam will have number 2.
Cam.
So
All right.
Scott will have 3 and 4 as we loop back. So first pick in this Big Ten power ranking draft, I got to go with the Ohio State Buckeyes, the team that Cam covers. And it's not just that this team is seemingly loaded at almost every position. It may have upgraded at quarterback with Will Howard. It added Quinshawn Judkins at running back. It added Caleb Downs to that defense. And it's clearly a team that has spent more than $20 million in NIL to try to get back to the top of the Big Ten and get top Michigan. But it's how many guys came back. And it's how veteran this team is across the board. Like when you think about what Michigan did the last 3 years and how they eventually got over the hump to win a national championship, you think about all the guys that stayed and didn't go pro, and you had the ridiculous depth of last year's team. And that's what I see from this Ohio State team. It's going to be just, this is a team again with the COVID years. You've got guys that are like 22 years old on this team in some situation, guys who are going to play a lot. So I think Ohio State's the favorite for the Big Ten. I think they're my favorite to win the national championship as we enter the season. But Cam, as our resident Ohio State guy, what do you think about this team? And is it national championship or bust for the fan base? Is that what they're thinking?
Yeah, I think it's for the fan base and the players. I mean, Denzel Burke has been pretty open about saying that. It's just one year where Ohio State really isn't shying away from the expectation. Like they usually go up to Indy and just say they want to focus on themselves and certain things, but I think they know that it's national championship or bust with how things went this offseason. And I think it's reality. I mean, like you said, this team is always had talent, but it's the guys that are coming back: Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Emeka Buka, Trayvon Henderson. Like there's just so many guys who should be in the NFL right now that are back for another year. Then you add in the newcomers. I mean, Quinshawn Judkins might be one of the best, might be the best running back in football. Caleb Downs might be the best defensive secondary player in football. So you just add so much other stuff to it. Then you bring in Chip Kelly. It's just the expectations are high. I think it's reality. There are some questions. The offensive line, I think they did upgrade with Will Howard over Kyle McCord, but the offensive line is still a question as well. So, but I think they are probably if not the most talented team in the country, second right behind Georgia. So I think it's a fair spot for them at number one.
Cam, you're a big college football 25 guy. Have you seen the Quinshawn Judkins spin move in that game?
I have. I played a friend of mine like the first day it came out and saw it firsthand, and I was like, I don't ever want to play this guy again. I was like, if Judkins is half as good in real life as he is in this video game, how is he going to run away with the national championship?
Yeah. And last thing on Ohio State here, Jeremiah Smith, a lot of hype. What do we think? Is he going to live up to that hype? Fall camp's getting underway here. Is that going to be the dude?
Yeah. He's a dude. Everything you see on social media is like you see a clip and you're like, oh man, that's crazy. But he does it every day. Like it's to the point where like Ohio State players and coaches are like, that's just who he is. Like, Denzel Burke said that he said already his favorite player to go against the practice is Jeremiah Smith because he's that good. I mean, Denzel Burke's a potential first round pick next year, so he's a real deal. I think he's going to have to, and the coaching staff is going to have to calm down the hype a little bit because he's probably going to start August 31st against Akron. And if he doesn't get 100 yards, people are going to be like, well, what's going on? Like, they're going to have to calm down the hype a little bit, but he is a dude, man. He's something special. He's something special.
Scott, what do you think about the Buckeyes?
Oh, they're number one to me. They're number one in the Big Ten. They're number one in the country right now. Their defense is top shelf. It's probably the best in the country. And as you said, they're bringing back all these players. And I think what you're seeing and what we're going to see as trending in the transfer portal is it's kind of NFL and philosophy where Ohio State, Iowa's this way, Michigan was there that way before. And that is sign your own guys, make your own guys feel wanted. They're going to come back rather than being a 6th or 7th round draft pick, or in some cases a higher one. They'd rather come back for good money and bring that national title back to that town, or bring back, have a great season and return and maybe get better and put yourself in a better position. And I look at the Buckeyes, and I don't know that I've seen a solid 1-2 punch like this in a long, long time. Maybe Felix Jones and Darren McFadden come to mind. I mean, Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson are just unbelievable. In fact, I think Judkins might be right now he might be my Heisman guy at the end of the year. So, and Jeremiah Smith, I mean, we looked at the last 4 to 5 years of Ohio State wide receivers from Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Chris Olave and Jamison Williams before he transferred. And then, of course, the best one that I've ever seen in the Big Ten, and Marvin Harrison. And Ibuka is in that category, not quite Harrison, but Jeremiah Smith might be in that category when it's all said and done. So the only question I have, two small ones, offensive line, can it be better? Those running backs are going to make them look really good in most games. But when they get against, they do have a maybe as difficult of a schedule in the Big Ten as there is, because they're going to be playing Oregon, Penn State, both on the road. They play Iowa at home and Michigan at home. Nebraska should be pretty decent this year, I think. So they've got a challenging schedule, and one or two of those teams is going to give them some issues. So can that offensive line coalesce and protect Will Howard, who I expect to probably be the starter? And two, will Will Howard take his game to the next level? He was really good at Kansas State, but at Ohio State, you got to be great. You got to win national titles. So there's going to be some pressure there. And of course, I like Julian Sayin. I just don't know that he's ready for that role even if he looks the part.
Yeah. All right, number 2 in the draft, Cam, you've got the pick.
Yeah, I think my pick's pretty easy. I'm going to go Oregon. I'm glad I had the second pick. I didn't have to choose between Ohio State and Oregon. I love Dan Lanning. I think he's a fantastic coach. I think you get a chance to pair him with Dylan Gabriel, who, like I think Scott mentioned, Quinshon Judkins as a Heisman guy. I think Dylan Gabriel is that guy for me. I think with that receiving core and with Dan Lanning and with everything that Oregon does on offense, I think they're poised to be the best offense in the Big Ten and maybe even the country. And I think it's going to be very hard for Oregon, for teams in the Big Ten to slow them down. I think they may run into some trouble when it comes to traveling out to the Big Ten in those win 3 months. I mean, I think they go to Wisconsin in November. They go to Michigan. So, like, those will be tough games, especially if the defense hasn't figured some things out by then. Because you can't just throw when you're in the Big Ten. You're going to get, and especially in November when you're going to Wisconsin and Michigan, that's a little more difficult. But I trust Dan Lanning. I think they'll figure it out. And by then they should know they should have a pretty good identity on both sides of the ball. But that team is loaded, speed, athleticism, experience. I think they are I think they're easily the second best team in the Big Ten. I think we talk about all these teams being added to the Big Ten. You talk about Ohio State maybe being 1 or 2 in the country right now. I think Oregon's right behind them. So they should be a preseason top 3 team in the country for me.
Oregon's an interesting place under Dan Lanning in that they are recruiting extremely well. They've got really good teams, but for 2 years he couldn't get past Washington.
Yeah.
They kept losing close games to Washington, and if you take out that game, if you take out the first game against Georgia, I don't know if they've lost another game otherwise. Like they've beaten everybody that they've needed to beat. They just haven't won those big games under Dan Lanning yet. That's what they need to do. That's what getting Ohio State at home is. That's what going to Wisconsin is. That's what going to Michigan is. It's what having Washington at the end of the year is. I think he lost to Oregon State one time too. So like, that's what we need to see out of Dan Lanning. You like everything else that they've got. They can put the team together. Can they win the big game? And I know he got a lot of flack because of the Washington games. He'd go for these 4th downs late in the game to try to secure it. I was at the Washington-Oregon game in Seattle last year. They fail on 4th down. Washington ends up winning the game because Oregon misses a field goal late. So like he's aggressive, and I think he's making the right calls in these games. They're just not going his way. And at some point they're going to start to go his way. And this feels like a team where that could happen, but there's a lot of those games on the schedule where you're going to have to do that for the first time. Scott, what do you think?
I'm there with you guys. I mean, I look at Oregon as right there with Ohio State and Georgia as the most talented teams in the country. Dylan Gabriel, grabbing him at quarterback was really a strong move for this, after losing Bo Nix. I like getting Evan Stewart. I think he's a talent, and if they can develop him, he's going to be he's going to replace, what Troy Franklin brought last year. But probably what I like the most about Oregon, and this is maybe how they've evolved from what they were maybe 10 years ago to now, is they're a line of scrimmage team. They can line up and play slam ball along the line of scrimmage, both sides. And so that's going to behoove them and help them when they move into the Big Ten. And they're facing teams that, do have that power play. And we saw that in their first championship game, the first college football playoff championship game when Ohio State played Oregon and Marcus Mariota was there. It was just line of scrimmage football that Ohio State was so much better than Oregon. I think that has changed. I think Dan Lanning and you've got to give credit, to before him too with Mario Cristobal. I think he started to develop that, and Dan has taken to another level. And whether or not they win at something big, the good thing with them is with this expanded playoff that let's say that they win every game except against Ohio State, and then they get to the championship game, they lose again to Ohio State. They still have an opportunity to probably host a game in the playoff and advance and show that they're capable of that. So I like them at number 2. I think it's clear right now. Now at the end of the year, we'll see. They do have, again, going on the road to Michigan and Wisconsin in November presents challenges and not just weather related. When you're playing those teams, even if you're a good team, going on the road in the Big Ten is not easy. For them going across the country into the Eastern time zone with Michigan or at Madison, you're going to face, a hostile environment and crowd. And there aren't very many of those were in the Pac-12 versus the Big Ten. And you're going to face a motivated team that'll really play hard, especially on the defensive side. So, but that said, talent-wise, they are just a shade behind the Buckeyes in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, Evan Stewart is the player I'm watching on this team. Like, we know Dylan Gabriel's a solid quarterback. As long as he can stay healthy, he has battled some injuries from time to time, and you hope he can. But Evan Stewart, a former top 5 overall recruit, Texas A&M, lightning speed. This guy is incredibly fast, and you like the idea of him getting into that Will Stein offense and what they've got there at Oregon. So he's a player I'm watching. Cam, anybody else on this team specifically that you're looking at?
No, I think we covered it. I think Scott makes a good point that the question for a lot of the former Pac-12 teams coming to the Big Ten is like, can you hold up front against the Big Ten? Because like we talked about, you get into those November months, you're not just slinging the ball around. It's one of the things that I even C.J. Stroud talked about a lot. It was like wanting to get to Indy so we can throw the ball indoors, and I think that's why he's having so much success in Houston. But Oregon is one of those Pac-12 teams that comes here and it's loaded up front. Like, they are ready to go in the trenches. So I think that will help their transition to Big Ten. I think that's why you can consider them one of the favorites, because they are already built that way. They're already kind of built like a Big Ten team. All
righty. Scott, you've got pick number 3.
And number 3, I'm going to go with the perpetual number 3, and that is Penn State. Doesn't matter the year, they're third, and that's not to necessarily diss them. It just seems to be where they've ended up in the batting order in the Big Ten all these years. But if there was a 12-team playoff system in place the last 10 years, they would have been in it 6 times and said they were in it 0. But looking at it this year, there's a lot I do like about Penn State. They lost some players off their really good defense, but I really think that Abdul Carter could be one of the best players in the country. He was a do-it-all type of player at linebacker. Now he's going to be off the edge. There's been some comparisons to Micah Parsons. I think that's a bit accelerated for him. But I do think he could be one of the best players in the country. And then, the perpetual question comes in, and I'm really interested to hear what Cam has to say about this, is Drew Aller. He's a very talented player. He was the number 2 quarterback when he was a true freshman. Last year, he stepped in, and for the most part, he played pretty decently, except against the best 2 teams, Ohio State and Michigan, and didn't do anything in those games. Now, I could also say he was a true sophomore. Overall, he threw 25 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, but you got to make big plays in big games. Now that he's a junior and he's dealt with that, and you look at Penn State's schedule, and it really sets up nicely for them. They open up at West Virginia, which won't be a pushover, but they're a pretty good team, but they're also one that Penn State's capable of beating. And then, later on, they play at USC, which should set up to be a really nice game. Back-to-back at Wisconsin and then Ohio State at home. But this team's more than capable of winning, say, 11 games. Even if they don't beat Ohio State in the regular season, they got a chance to get to Indianapolis. They'll have the chance to, play a home game at minimum in the playoff. and advance and do some of the things that they really could have done before. And I really, if it wasn't for Ohio State's running back tandem, I think this might be one of the best ones in the country with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. I think they're really a talented team. I do have more questions with them than I do the others, which is I'm not so sure their offensive line is going to be very good. And I think the receivers have a drop off, especially from the top two teams. But I do like Andy Kotelnicki coming in as the offensive coordinator. He did some great things at Kansas. I think he can do the same thing at Penn State. So this is a team that I think is maybe is down a step from the other two, but can have a similar record, especially as Oregon, based on the schedule.
Cam, what do you think of Drew Aller? You saw him struggle up in Columbus last year.
Oh, man. Yeah, he was bad up in Columbus, man. That was rough. That was one of the hardest games. And I guess I cover Ohio State, so it's hard for me. Scott covers Iowa, but that was one of the hardest games for me to watch offensively, man. That was McCord and Aller were bad, but I don't think Penn State really let Drew Aller sling it last year. It just seemed like they tried to play so safe with him and not turn the ball over and kind of get him into some rhythm. He just never got in rhythm against Ohio State, and credit to Ohio State's defense. I think they were really, really, really good that game, even without Denzel Burke. They had a true freshman as their cornerback 2 in that game. So I think he will be better this year. My questions for them are, like Scott said, their offensive line is a question, but I don't know who he's going to throw to. Julian Fleming, obviously transferred from Ohio State, speed guy, strong guy. Like he can do a lot of different things, but I don't know that he's a wide receiver 1 in the Big Ten. And if he's a wide receiver 1 or 2, I don't know how you're getting open against some of the better teams like Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan. Like some of those teams, defensive secondaries are just really, really good. And I think that's going to put some pressure on Drew Aller to try to find guys open and even throw guys open. I think you may see some of his interceptions go up this year, especially if Penn State really kind of lets him open things up a little more. But I do like Penn State overall. I think Abdul Carter, like Scott said, is one of the best defensive players in the country. I'm excited to see him this year. I think where they go relies on Drew Aller and his step. And then also play calling in big games. I think there were times in the Ohio State game where they were running the football really well, and then they just decided to turn the ball to Drew Aller, and things just didn't go well. So they have to get over a hump. Like they will forever be number 3 in the Big Ten until they can get over that hump. But fortunate for them, Ohio State and Oregon play each other. So like Scott said, they have a good shot to make it to Indy if they can win the games they're supposed to. And then luckily for them, they get Ohio State in Penn State this year. So that's a game that they will have the home field on their side too.
Yeah, I mean, like if it was ever going to happen, this has to be the year. Michigan has a lot of turnover. You get Ohio State at home, and you don't play Oregon. Like that, you can't ask for much more in this new Big Ten, and that's what Penn State has with the schedule. To me, it really comes down to that 3-game stretch of at USC, bye week, at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home. Yeah. Those are the 3 games that are going to determine your season or not. But my biggest question is really what Cam said, which was, like, who's going to get open? Like, that was the problem with Drew Aller last year. A big part of it was that guys just weren't open. And there's nothing a quarterback can do when they're not open. And so I think Andy Kotelnicki hiring him as offense coordinator may end up being the most consequential coordinator hire of the cycle last year. Because at Kansas, at Buffalo before that, he does a really good job of just scheming things up and getting guys open in different ways. And Penn State desperately needed that. They were so incredibly stale on offense last year. Guys couldn't get open. They couldn't scheme them to get open. You got to be more creative and be more consistent, like Cam said, in terms of running and passing and understanding what's working. Because they were running the ball pretty well at times in that Ohio State game, and they would just go away from it. So I think that, I don't know if I would have taken Penn State at 3, like Cam did, like Scott did here, but it's got to be somebody's got to be 3, and so I get the pick. But Scott, you've got number 4 as well, and I think we can probably predict where that one's going to go.
Well, it's kind of a coin flip for me, 3 through 5, but since I'm making this pick at 4, I'm going to go with the team that I primarily have covered, and that's Iowa. And there's a couple of things with Iowa that I think puts them in this category. Number one is that for the second straight year, they led the nation in average yards per play allowed, Except last year, they actually had 196 more plays than number 2. That's significant. It shows you how good that defense was. And like Ohio State, they paid their guys to stay. And that was really impactful for them. They have a linebacker in Jay Higgins who had 171 tackles. They have the entire secondary save for Cooper DeJean back. They have most of their line up front back on a unit that was really good and really impactful. Flipping it over the offensive side of the ball, which is always the case with Iowa, there are changes, there are differences. And I think it's debatable whether Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State or, and then, of course, Chip Kelly at Ohio State, but also Tim Lester at Iowa at offensive coordinator, he is an impactful hire as anybody. And part of this is going to be philosophical. In the past, Kirk Ferentz has kind of oversaw the offense and massaged some things. This time around, he's handing the keys off to Tim Lester. The only thing that he really required was they keep the same fundamentals in the way they block. It's not going to be schematic. There's going to be changes there. And offensive line, I mean, there were so many issues with the offense last year. You just lump them in one big category. But I think some of the differences now is that they do have 155 career starts up front. They had several injuries last year. They had Luke Lachey, whose dad, Jim Lachey, it was an All-American at Ohio State. Luke Lachey was one of the best tight ends in the country before he broke his leg. Caden McNamara is back after a torn ACL, and they do have a really good backfield. Wide receiver is not good for them. They've got a long way to go there. But I think the way that they're scheming some things, I think Iowa has a chance to not only have some success offensively, but also complement its defense and help it rather than hurt it. Their schedule also plays in their favor. I mean, they go to Ohio State, but the rest of the schedule, they're playing Washington at home. Well, that's not Washington last year. They've got Wisconsin and Nebraska at home. They go to UCLA, not USC. Iowa State is at home, and I think even though it's not a Big Ten team, it should be a pretty decent team. So there's a lot of stars aligning for Iowa, and these types of years tend to go one way or the other. They tend to really maximize their season and could end up in the playoff, or they could go 7-5 and lose all the close games. So I think Iowa's right in that category.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in that the last 2 years, but especially last year, like, yes, the offense has been a problem. Yes, it's a running joke, but there were so many more other factors that added to it. All those injuries, having Deacon Hill as your quarterback for most of the season, not having a ton of guys at scholarship wide receiver. Like, so there were some other circumstances on top of the normal problems. But like Penn State, like you just said, the schedule sets up in a way where, like, you got to take advantage of it this year. You got Ohio State, but you don't got Oregon. You don't got Penn State. You have most of your other important games at home. Like, this is the year to put it together. And if Cade McNamara can stay healthy, I really liked him at Michigan. I thought he did a really solid year. 2021, I think that was, before eventually JJ McCarthy, usurped him and became a top 10 pick. So, like, I like that there's a lot of pieces here. And for all the jokes about Iowa, this isn't a team that's terrible on offense and goes 4-8. Like, they're always winning like 8-9 games a year. You just got to make the offense even just below average to average, and everything else should come together pretty well. This isn't like Stanford and the way Stanford fell apart under David Shaw. No, Iowa's still really good in a lot of ways. And yes, some of that defensive success may be because you're playing so many Big Ten West teams, but this year's schedule, again, doesn't have a lot of the best offenses in the conference other than Ohio State. So, like, they can continue that advantage of the schedule that they've had for the last couple of years. Cam, what do you think about Iowa?
Yeah. Scott took my pick. I was definitely going to take Iowa if he took Michigan there. But I think Iowa's a playoff team. I mean, when we did our pre-media day roundtable, I think I had Iowa as my fourth playoff team for the Big Ten. I think if that offense is just average, I think they're going to be really, really difficult to beat for a lot of teams. And they should make the playoff. I like McNamara. I think like you said, Chris, he was good at Michigan in 2021. I think he has the opportunity to be the person this offense needs. He doesn't have to be too flashy. They just have to consistently be able to move the ball a little bit. They don't have to put up 30 points a game. This defense is good enough to carry them. It just has to be more consistent. And I think that's what they can do. Like you said, the schedule's favorable for them. I think coming to Ohio State will be a nice kind of test for them, being able to see where they are earlier in the year, both on offense and defense. I expect that game to be a defensive slugfest. I think the last time they came to Ohio State, both teams crossed the 50 three times. I think we expect something similar to that. But if they can be just average, I think they are fourth best team in the Big Ten. I think they're a playoff team. I think they can surprise some people. I think people will see their name in the playoff rankings and be like, are they really? It won't be the same joke as it has been offensively as in the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, both those picks, Penn State and Iowa, those are the teams that are going to benefit from this new playoff more than anybody else.
The bubble teams.
Right. And one last thing I'll add to this is that you got to give Kirk Ferentz credit over the last few years for some schools to have this kind of division between an elite defense and a horrific offense, that there'll be people sniping at one another and infighting. That never happened. I mean, they won 10 games last year, averaging 15 points a game.
Right.
And the defense stood up for the offense. It felt that responsibility, and there was never, and I hear a lot, there were never really behind the closed doors yelling matches or anything like that. They all stood beside each other. And that's something that really, when you have that adversity, and Kirk Ferentz has done it. 3 out of the last 5 years, they've won 10 games. So they have a history of pretty good success. And I think this year it does set up for them with the schedule. If Cade McNamara stays healthy, he's the starter. And I think that they've got an opportunity to be in that playoff discussion all the way through the end.
A big question, though, replacing Tory Taylor, the punter. That's a pretty big, one of the best punters in college football history. That is a pretty big loss. How do they feel at punter?
Well, I think they're hoping that he doesn't have to punt as much as Tory did, who did set a record for punt yardage last year that was broken by a Michigan State punter in 1938. So they've got a rookie, a freshman, true freshman from Australia. And this shows you what they do a little bit differently. And one is they went to Australia. They grabbed somebody from Pro Kick. When they had the number 1 ranked punter in their state, an hour south of them, who grew up an Iowa fan, but they chose the Australian punter instead, and Drew Miller was the other punter, went to Georgia because they liked the style of the Australian punter, because it really was so successful for them and how they defended it, and the way that it worked with Tory Taylor, it played into their complementary style of football. So I can't predict anybody's going to be Tory Taylor. He was just so tremendous. He legitimately, to me, had a major role in winning anywhere from 3 to 5 games over his career. And if this guy could just be, Reese Dakin is his name, if he could just be complimentary, I think that they'll still be in good shape.
Yeah. The over-under from BetMGM for Iowa wins is 8. I no betting advice here, but I like that over a lot because of that schedule. So we will see. Cam, you've got pick number 5.
Yeah, I feel like I have to go with Michigan here.
Finally, the defending national champ.
Right. How many times did the defending national champ end up 5th on a power ranking? But there's some questions. Like, I like Donovan Edwards. I think you might have wanted to see more from him last year. He had a great national championship game, but I thought you might have wanted to see more from him last year. I think they're going to have to lean on him. The defense is going to be really good. I think Will Johnson is the best corner in the country. I think before Caleb Downs got in the Big Ten, Will Johnson was my pick for probably Defensive Player of the Year this year. I think he's that good. The defense will be really, really good again. But you have questions at quarterback. I don't know how Edwards will be taking over the entire load. Hopefully he's not playing too much college football, although he's very good at that game. But I like what they have. I think they're going to be very, very good. I think Sharon Moore. Again, you have a new coach. It's a lot of questions, but they're defending national champs. The defense loaded. When you have a corner like Will Johnson, he allows you to do a little bit more, get a little more creative on defense, just knowing he's going to lock down on the side of the field. So the defending champs can't go any lower than this. I think Michigan's an obvious 5. I think they're on the outside looking in the playoff, but if they can figure out their quarterback situation, and Donovan Edwards is what they hope he can be, I think they can be a playoff team as well. I think they can probably jump into that 4th spot if Iowa falters a little bit.
Yeah, Donovan Edwards, weird situation. Guy who had a huge game against Ohio State 2 years ago. You think you've got this kind of 2-headed rushing attack. He didn't do much all of last year. And then the national championship game comes and he has a
Exploded.
heck of a game. He explodes and he's on the cover of the video game the next year. If he doesn't do that, who the heck knows? So, are you going to get that Donovan Edwards, or are you going to get the guy who was kind of really hit and miss the previous couple of years? To me, this really just comes down to quarterback and what you're getting. We talked about this on the last episode, but Alex Orji or Jack Tuttle, it seems like it's probably down to those two guys. Tuttle's the veteran, maybe the safer pick. Orji, does he play more? Does he still only have certain packages? Another guy who's really, really good in the video game, but we have no idea because we just haven't seen him throwing the ball in games very much at all. And the offensive line lost a lot, but I think they'll be solid there. I think they'll continue to be what they were. Sharon Moore still the coach. Like they're going to be solid there. My second biggest question also is that schedule. The over under for wins is 9, but they've got Texas, USC, Oregon, Ohio State. That's like probably 3 preseason top 5 teams. I think the rest of the schedule you can get through pretty easily, but it feels like 9-3 is maybe your ceiling, or 10-2 is maybe your ceiling, just because of those high profile games. 2 of them are at home. Oregon and Texas are at home, but I don't know. If they beat Texas there in week 2, then throw everything out the window, and you're thinking repeats. We'll find out pretty quickly, at least what Michigan has, right, Scott?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it really does come down to quarterback, and that we forget that before JJ McCarthy and a little bit of Cade McNamara, that was a real problem for Michigan for a long, long time, was quarterback. And so they had those two. JJ McCarthy was the first one that they really developed that was really a good player. I mean, Denard Robinson was decent, but in a different way. But they've got to do that again. And Jack Tuttle to me is safe. If you feel like you need to play risk averse, then go that route. But if you feel like you want to reach a ceiling that the schedule says that they may not have a very high ceiling, I think you got to go with Alex Orji and let him make mistakes. And even though they play Fresno State, which is a decent team in the Mountain West, I think they could struggle there. That's good. Learn how to struggle, because you're going to have to fight through it. The next week, if you lose to Texas, that's okay in this world now with a 12-team playoff. Play well. Texas is good. They're probably better than Michigan right now. And then work your way through the season. Arkansas State, USC at home, Minnesota at home, at Washington. To me, I think the way to go is go with Alex Orji. Let him work through some issues. And if they're 5-1 at that point, then I think Michigan's in a decent spot and work through the rest of the season. But also the other side is they do have a new head coach, and Sharon Moore did an outstanding job as an interim head coach for Harbaugh last year, parts of the season. But they're also going to get everybody's best shot. And it's not just because they won the national title, but it's because of, they did some things along the way that people weren't real happy with, and that was universal. So I would expect this to be a grind for them. I would expect them to have some games that probably shouldn't be close on paper to be very close. And I would expect that if there's a team that can run it up on them, they will. So this is going to be a tough year for them. They have a really good defense. They're going to fight, but I think this is going to be a weekend grind for Michigan. And I put them at 5th. I think talent-wise, they're in probably the 4th range. But I just think that with the schedule and some of the adversity they're going to face, and then the quarterback uncertainty, is really going to push them into that probably Citrus Bowl, ReliaQuest Bowl range.
It was like, I think about the last time Michigan won the championship, 97. The next year, 98, they lose to Notre Dame in week 1. They lose to Syracuse. I think Donovan McNabb was a quarterback on that team in week 2, and they start off 0-2, and then they finished 10-3, and their only loss was to Ohio State. And so 10-3 is a real solid season. They go to the Citrus Bowl, and they win the Citrus Bowl and all this stuff that sets up the next year with Tom Brady and Drew Henson. They go to the Orange Bowl and that type of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting kind of maybe transition year here. Cam, did you have anything else on Michigan?
I guess just really quickly. I mean, you guys talk about the quarterbacks. I think Scott makes a good point with the risk versus safety assessment of both quarterbacks. I think we look at Michigan last year. I mean, JJ was good, but they didn't ask JJ to do a ton.
Right.
He kept the offense going. I think that's what this team needs to be again. Now there's going to be games where I think they're not the same Michigan team and not as experienced as they were a year ago. So you may have to take more risks. So I think that's right. I think Orgy is probably the guy to lead this team, but there's going to be some growing pains there as they figure out who they can lean on offense, whether Donovan Edwards is that guy. But I think this team, like Scott said, I think they're probably the fourth most talented team. I think they can probably answer some questions early. I think if they're 5-1 going into that bye week right before they play Illinois, I think they're in a really good spot. Then you'll kind of figure out your identity a little bit. Obviously, you have Oregon and Ohio State to end the year, but if you go 5-1 those first six, and then you lose Oregon, Ohio State, that's a good year with the talent or the questions you had preseason coming into this year.
Yeah, going to be one of the most interesting teams, I think, in all of college football this year, especially as we go into a 12-team playoff era. I've got the next pick, and I kind of can't believe I'm doing this. This is where it gets hard. We kind of know the top 5 or 6. This is what pick 6 here.
6.
We're on
6, yeah.
It's
a log jam here.
I'm gonna go with Nebraska, and I kind of can't believe I'm doing that. A team that cannot win a 1-score game, a team that started last year 5-3 before losing its final 4 games each by 1 score. But I just really like what they've got, and as long as they just stop blowing it, I think they'll be pretty good. Though the over/under win total is 7.5, and you look at the schedule, it's another favorable schedule. They've got Ohio State on the road, but they don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon, I think this is a team that should finally get over the hump with Matt Rule in his second season. You've got either Dylan Raiola at quarterback, who looked very explosive in the spring, or you've got Heinrich Haarberg as well. They've returned a lot of that offensive line back, and the defense made huge strides last year under Tony White, the first-year defensive coordinator. And so if they can just continue that year 2 improvement, I think Nebraska can end up being a really, really solid team. Scott, you're somebody who knows the Cornhuskers pretty well. What do you think of that pick?
I think it's right on. I had them as my 6/7 pick, just depending on which way we went. And they have the most advantageous schedule in the Big Ten. But the one thing about them is this is a program. I mean, it's shocking for those of us who grew up with this sport to say that the last time they made a bowl game was 2016. No other Power 5 or Power 4 conference team has gone that long. And that's really says a lot about Nebraska and how it's struggled in different ways and the flop that Scott Frost was. But your point's well taken. This defense is really good. It played really well last year, and most of the pieces are returning, which is very, very helpful. I think that there's some offensive skill players that are better than maybe they showed in the past. I think Gabe Ervin at running back is going to be one of the better running backs in the Big Ten, and there are a lot of good ones. And Thomas Fidone, who's finally healthy at tight end, was one of the highest ranked tight ends coming into the country when he picked Nebraska a few years ago. And finally, with Dylan Raiola, I understand that they have other suitors that you're experimenting with. Just let him line up and play. I mean, when you look at this, the first 6 games before they get to even a bye, UTEP at home, Colorado at home, which I think is going to be monumental for both programs, Northern Iowa, Illinois at home, first 4 are at home, at Purdue, and then Rutgers at home, and then a bye week, and then they play at Indiana. Let your team grow with Dylan Raiola. He's your 5-star. He's your celebrated guy. He's going to make some mistakes, but he's making them against teams that if you play well, you should beat. Now, a lot of those teams have beaten Nebraska over the years. Purdue and Illinois,
right,
in Indiana, they have. Colorado last year blew them out. But I think Nebraska is more than capable now of being a better team and getting to a position where they're not only in a bowl, but they're competing for a pretty good bowl, maybe a January 1st bowl this year, or that area.
Cam, do you think they can finally get over the hump?
Yeah. I had Nebraska 6 on my list. I really like this team. I really do. I think that Colorado game's going to be big. I think there's really solid defensively. I think if they can get after Shedeur Sanders, they can get off to a real good start there. I mean, you mentioned those first 2 games before they get a bye, but I look at if they win those first five, as you said, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, and Purdue, that's a good spot to be in before you host Rutgers. And Rutgers is a really good team. I think that'll be a really good game there in Lincoln. But I agree with Scott. I think you let Raiola go out there and play those 5 games, are games that he can make mistakes in. You rely on your defense early, and you go from there. But this is a team that just is solid defensively, but like you said, Chris, just hasn't gotten over the hump. And I think Raiola is that guy to get them over the hump there. Like if he can just provide them some consistency and learn from his mistakes, I think they could be a surprise team in the Big Ten. And I think the fan base is going to love this kid. I think especially if he can have a good game against UTEP, I think they have a good chance to rile up that fan base, especially with 4 home games in a row to start the season. I think they could get some pretty good momentum and put a pretty good year together for Matt Rule.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go with my 7th pick here as we do the snake draft, and I'm going to go with the USC Trojans. And kind of wild when you think about where this program was in Lincoln Riley's first year, but the vibes are not good right now coming out of Los Angeles. I mean, recruiting is not going great. They're getting beat for kids in their backyard, especially by teams like Oregon. They finally made a defensive coordinator change, hired Danton Lynn, who I think is a good coach who came from USC. But they didn't take a transfer quarterback, or at least a big-time transfer quarterback. They did get the kid from UNLV. But they're going with Miller Moss. And then you look at the schedule. The schedule is rough. You open with LSU. You've got to go to Michigan in week 3, Wisconsin after that. You got Penn State in October. You got to go to Washington, and you have Nebraska, and you finish with Notre Dame. That's a pretty tough schedule. You don't have Oregon on there, but it's still a pretty tough schedule from top to bottom. Scott, where do you think USC fits in this new Big Ten? People are not happy about the direction under Lincoln Riley right now. You got Paul Feinbaum calling him a fraud and all this kind of stuff. I wouldn't go that far. The dude was one Pac-12 championship win away from making the 14 playoff 2 years ago. But things have very much changed in those 2 years since then.
I think this is the program that will struggle the most entering the Big Ten. Oregon, line of scrimmage team, will compete and will compete for a while as long as Dan Lanning's there. I think USC has to change its style of play. And I think in some ways it kind of mirrors a little bit of what happened in Nebraska, which chose not to do that. And it really paid the price early on in its tenure before it changed styles and it just never caught up. I think with USC, I like Miller Moss. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback there. And I think they have some good skill position players. But as you said, that schedule is going to be really rough. I mean, they play LSU right off the bat. That's not going to be easy. And then they go to Michigan and followed up with Wisconsin. They go to Minnesota, which is not an easy team to play. They're not a great team by any stretch, but they're a team that they can slug it out for 40 minutes with the ball. And USC's defense, as we saw last year, if they could get pummeled to death back-to-back against those teams, then, oh, by the way, you're playing Penn State, and then you're traveling across the country to Maryland. You've got Rutgers after the World Series game. And then down the stretch, as we've mentioned, the last 3 games after a bye, Nebraska at home. Nebraska's a physical team. A crosstown rival in UCLA. Those are unpredictable. And then Notre Dame to finish. They might be borderline on a bowl year. And it's because of that schedule, but it's also style of play. They're going to have to get good on defense really quick, or they're going to get bludgeoned up front, and or they're going to have to change their style of play, which I know that they're not going to want to do so under Lincoln Riley. So I'm not buying much, I should say, on USC being really good this year. Now, if they can get back to line of scrimmage play, sure, they've got all the everything you want in a program, but this year might be a real problem for them.
Yeah, their over-under win total is 7.5. That performance against Washington last year, one of the worst rush defense performances you've ever seen. I mean, they were getting 10 yards a pop before even making contact. Cam, thoughts on USC?
Yeah, I like Miller Moss. I think Lincoln Riley will be fine. I think they'll, at least a quarterback, I think he'll have Miller Moss ready to go. Like Scott, though, I question just how they're going to do a lot in the Big Ten with just some of the lack of physicality they have up front. Like, this isn't the Big 12. Like, you're not going to go in there and throw up 50 points a game and expect to win football games in the Big Ten. It's just not it. I think they're going to have to change a lot of what they do both stylistically, but also recruiting wise. Like it seems like every summer they have a good recruiting class, and then guys decommit. Flip to Georgia, flip to Alabama, flip somewhere else down south, and they have to figure out one ways to keep those guys, or decide, okay, we're not going to recruit Georgia as much, or we're not going to recruit somewhere else. We're going to go elsewhere and find guys that can hold it down in the trenches, because they have to figure it out. I don't think they're built for the Big Ten right now, and it's unfortunate that they have a loaded schedule. Like Scott said, I think they're a borderline bowl team. I think I had them 8th for me on the Big Ten, but I do think Miller Moss will be fine. I think that's obviously he's coming in and replacing Caleb, but I think Lincoln Riley have him ready to go quarterback. I've never questioned whether a quarterback from Lincoln Riley will play well.
All right, Cam, you're up.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Wisconsin. I really like Luke Fickell to have a good year here. I love Tyler Van Dyke for this offense. I do have questions of how they're going to replace Braylon Allen. Like he was just so good for them. But Wisconsin is just historically like very physical. They're going to be fine on defense. I think Tyler Van Dyke has a good chance to do some things for this offense while they try to figure out what they want to do at running back. But it's not easy to go up to Wisconsin and win football games. And I think this is the chance for Luke Fickell to kind of build awesome things from last year. I just, like I said, the biggest thing for me is how they're going to run the ball, or who's going to be that guy to run the ball, because they leaned on Braylon Allen so much. So I think without him, you're going to have to rely on Tyler Van Dyke to adjust very quickly. And that is my biggest question for them. But I think they're a very solid middle of the road Big Ten team. Obviously, I think they should easily be in a bowl game. But I don't think they're quite in the upper echelon yet, but I think they're a middle of the road, solid Big Ten team right now.
Yeah, it was a weird first year for Luke Fickell and them there. They never really got something going. Couldn't really figure out what the identity was. They had a bunch of injuries that didn't help. I had completely forgotten that Tyler Van Dyke was the quarterback. He was another fun trivia of where are they now, guys moving all over the country. Which reminds me, we had this trivia question on our last episode. Scott, do you know where Deacon Hill ended up?
Utah Tech.
He did. Utah Tech.
New named school. Yeah.
Formerly Dixie State out there in Utah. I believe it's an FCS program. But yeah, I think what I'm looking for in Wisconsin in year 2 is just figure out that identity. They weren't Wisconsin. And that's fine if you're something else, because the reason Wisconsin made the change was because it didn't want to be what it had always been. But it didn't figure out what it was. You have to figure out what that new thing is. And Ches Malusi at running back, real solid player, had a good year a couple of years ago. He's probably your number 1 running back at this point. But Scott, again, someone who's really kind of tuned in with the Badgers. What do you think?
This is probably about right. I think if you were just to like blindly say, what does this team look like without looking at the schedule, I'd probably put them 6th. I do think that they have some pieces. I think they have an easier fix on defense than offense. They made a few changes. They didn't look quite the same as they did before. I thought they took a step back on defense because they were elite for so many years in that on that side of the ball. Their run fits, the way they got after the quarterback, and they weren't quite as good, but they went out and they got good pieces in the portal, Leon Lowry among them, that I think can really elevate their defense to be close, maybe not as good as they were a few years ago, but be in that neighborhood. Offensively, I'm anxious to see, is Tyler Van Dyke, is he going to be an upgrade? Last year you had guys that, I don't know, you bring somebody in from the South. Are they going to be good? Last year didn't work out for them. And Ches Malusi's a good running back. Braylon Allen had so many positives, but this is the danger that you run into if you're Wisconsin. And, for all these years, Wisconsin and Iowa especially had these identities. And, we can scoff at them or whatever, but power football, because you can recruit to that in the upper Midwest, that style of play works. It wins. You just needed some skill players. I mean, if Graham Mertz would have been the quarterback that they thought he was going to be, then Wisconsin's fine. He wasn't, and they couldn't go off of that. Now you're allowing other teams to fill that power vacuum. And when you go from having 3 wide receivers on 30% of your possessions to 90% of your possessions in that upper Midwest, it draws some questions. Now, can Tyler Van Dyke do that? Do they have the receivers to do it? They do have some pretty good linemen, but they've got to get their cadence straightened out. There was a lot of false starts and stuff. I like Wisconsin to be in that 7-8 win range, but it's really their last 5 are going to determine what the next offseason and even the future of Luke Fickell is going to be. They go Penn State at Iowa, bye, Oregon at home, at Nebraska, Minnesota at home. And, if they go 3-2 or even 2-3 over that stretch, all right, they'll be okay moving forward. But if they go 1-4 or 0-5, it's going to be, and it's possible, it could be a really tough offseason for the Badgers.
Yeah, and it's a program that obviously benefited for a while from being in the Big Ten West. And Scott, I know you're the longtime Big Ten West defender and everything that division was, but they're not going to have that advantage anymore. Obviously, they don't have Ohio State or Michigan on the schedule this year, but now that Oregon's in the league, USC's in the league, both of them are on the schedule, Penn State as well. Throw in Alabama in your non-conference schedule. Their over-under win total is 6.5, which feels about right. And I could really see it going either way on that. There's just so many, I think, 50-50 games on this schedule. So, Cam, did you have anything else about Wisconsin? Otherwise, it's yep.
Yeah, no, lastly, I just like you mentioned the Pac-12 teams, and I think that'll make things a little more difficult for Wisconsin. But I think when those teams end up traveling to Wisconsin, whether it's in November or whether it's in September, I think their eyes are gonna open because that place is not easy to play in. I mean, those fans get rowdy, and that becomes a juggernaut fist fight from the first second to the last second. So I think it'll be different for them, obviously not being in the West, but I think they'll be a team that's consistently pretty good in the future of this Big Ten, just because of how their style of play and them playing at Camp Randall. I love Camp Randall. It's still one of my favorite college football stadiums. And I think those Pac-12 teams will, I think their eyes will open when they get in there too.
Yeah, I mean, USC historically, struggled when they'd go up to Oregon State or go to Pullman, go to some of these places. So they've been in some of those, and now they'll just be more of those. So number 9 here, it's on to you, Scott.
All right, I'm going to go with a team I never would have dreamed I would have picked even 2 years ago, but now I think that they're in this position, and that's the Rutgers Scarlet Knights under Greg Schiano. I like the way he's built this program. 2 years ago, before he got there, I think we all were in agreement as, why are you even in this league? You can't compete. You're getting beat on the average of, I think it was like 39-5 over a 4 or 5 year period. But
you and Stu wrote a story about it, about Rutgers and how much of a disaster it was.
And it was. I think it was 2019 might have been the worst year for any team in the Big Ten history, just the way that they played. But when you look at how he's built that team, developmental wise, they're not trying to be something that they're not. They're going out and getting Jersey kids, tough kids, playing hard on defense. They've got kids that stayed. They didn't go in the portal much, and they didn't pluck from the portal very much. That was really smart for them on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to compete. I'm not suggesting they're going to win championships, but I think they're going to compete. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they probably have the best player in the Big Ten that really nobody knows about, in Kyle Monangai. Led the Big Ten in rushing last year. He is a legitimate NFL guy. Yeah. And I think up front, they bring back a lot of starters. I think they're really competitive. And then finally, you could debate between Nebraska and Rutgers as to who has the easiest schedule. When you forget their non-con, I think at Virginia Tech will tell us something about them. But for the most part, they match up really well. They go to Nebraska. That's a game that I think is somewhat of a coin flip. I mean, Wisconsin at home. They go to USC and they got to play at 11 o'clock Eastern time at night. Yeah. But what Greg Schiano said, and we joked, he's like, look, it only matters to me and Kirk Soraka. It doesn't matter to the players. They're fine. But their Final Four, Minnesota at home, at Maryland, Illinois at home, at Michigan State, those are winnable games. I think that this is a situation where Rutgers could win 8 games, maybe even 9 in the Big Ten, and really take another step forward and be a competitive team here year in and year out.
Yeah, and their over-under win total from BetMGM is only 6.5, which kind of surprised me. So last December, Schiano got a humongous raise it raised to $6.25 million for his salary, which to that point, he hadn't yet posted a winning season in his second stint. I think they finished 7-6 last year. I think that's right. But that salary would have ranked third in the ACC or the Pac-12. It just kind of highlighted how ridiculously high the money is in the Big Ten. But I was also like, who's hiring Greg Schiano? You know, like, why did you need to give him this massive raise to more than $6 million? But since then, I think they won their bowl game after that. And also, they currently have a top 20 recruiting class at the moment. They got 6 4-star kids in that class. I think there might be a couple top 100 kids in there as well. Pull that up. And yeah, they got quite a few. And it seems to be working. Now, again, this is not a program that's going to win the Big Ten, probably ever. But he's starting to maximize again what you can get out of that place, which is what he did the first time, which pretty much nobody else has been able to do. So we talked about the vibes being really bad at USC right now. The vibes at Rutgers are very good. That thing's on the upswing right now. So, yeah, I think it could be a really interesting season for them with, again, the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. Cam?
Yeah, I'd smash the over on Rutgers at 6.5. Like, I think they're 8-9 team. I love this team. They really, I mean, people might forget, like, they were beating Ohio State at halftime last year. They probably could have taken Ohio State to the wire had not been for a pick right.
Oh man, that pick six. Was that pick six? Yeah.
No, yeah, right. Yeah, right on the goal line. That just changed everything for them. So this Rutgers team's really, really good. I think defensively they're going to be really solid. Like you said, easy schedule in the Big Ten. You're talking about a breakout team in the Big Ten this year. I think it's Rutgers. I think they're going to be really, really solid. The schedule helps them, but I think Schiano's building something special there, especially as it can be at Rutgers. Like you said, they're never going to win the Big Ten, but who knows? Maybe if he can build this up a little more, they can be that bubble playoff team, especially with the expanded playoffs. So they're going to be really good. That's kind of where I'm at. I think I love it. I wanted to pick them over Wisconsin. I did, but I was like, I kind of like Tyler Van Dyke a little more. But I think they're going to be solid right now.
Yeah, my biggest question for them is quarterback. I mean, they took Ethan Kaliakmanis from Minnesota. They Gavin Wimsatt hit the portal right after that. He was a really good running quarterback. They were, as Iowa's passing offense was, Rutgers was the worst in the country last year. I think Kaliakmanis is better than that, but I think he got hamstrung a little bit, so he might be able to do some things there. But really, if they can run the ball, not turn it over, play defense, the way the schedule sets up, I think Rutgers is in really good shape to have a year that they're going to be very proud of, and maybe end up in again one of those upper level bowl games that nobody would have dreamed of 4 or 5 years ago.
All right, Scott, you've got the next pick as well.
Yeah, I'm going to stick in my beloved Big Ten West here, because it actually had a higher floor than the East with old Rutgers, Maryland, and Indiana playing every year. But I'm going to go with Minnesota, the Mighty Gophers under PJ Fleck. And they have a challenging schedule. And it's going to, if they can survive early on, I think they're going to be pretty competitive. But they've got some sneaky good skill position players on offense. I think Daniel Jackson might be one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. He was second team All Big Ten last year. He's in that same breath as Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman were a few years ago. Darius Taylor was hurt off and on, but he is a phenomenal running back, completely different than what they had in Muhammad Ibrahim a few years ago. And then they have maybe the best left tackle in the league or close to it in Arante Ursary. But why I like them here as opposed to maybe down a couple of spots is that I like the quarterback they brought in, Max Brosmer from New Hampshire. 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 3,000 yards. He was a finalist for the Walter Payton Award. I think he's AFCA first team All-American FCS quarterback. I think Minnesota has the offense to compete with some of these teams. And I think PJ Fleck does have to loosen the reins a little bit, let them play this way. And then, defensively, some questions I have for them, and that's why they're probably here as opposed to up, because, losing Joe Rossi to Michigan State is a big loss. He was a really good coordinator. And, but their schedule plays out where it's pretty front loaded in the Big Ten. But if they can get by without going 0 for 4, think that this is a team that could be in the 7-8, maybe even 9-win range.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when the UCLA job opened up, a lot of people I talked to were like, PJ Fleck maybe should take a look at that. And said, for a lot of coaches, you kind of want to reset your clock. And he's had a couple of downish years at Minnesota, and some people thought he should have taken it, or at least tried. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten it. They promoted from within. But this is a year for Minnesota where they need to bounce back, and they need to show that they can kind of get back into that upper echelon, top half of the Big Ten type of stuff. They do have a lot of change, like you said, and that schedule is really tough. So it's kind of hard to predict, I think, what they're going to do. The over-under for them was 5.5. So Vegas is not expecting a big year out of Minnesota. So interesting pick there.
Yeah. I thought the same thing. I had Minnesota a little bit further just because down my board, just because of the changes they have. But I think they should do enough to get 6 wins. I think 5.5. I'd take them at 6. They do. I mean, they have to go to Wisconsin. They go to Michigan. They have Penn State at home, which is nice for them. But I've always liked PJ Fleck as a head coach. I do wonder at what point it's time for him to go, or he decides to get out of there. Like, I agree with you, Chris. I think this is a year that they have to get over the hump. I think they have to be a bowl team again. It's just a lot of change there. I think they should do enough, and they have enough talent to get the 6 wins. But I think they're a little further down my Big Ten board. But I've always liked PJ Fleck. I will trust him again, but 6 wins has to be where they're at. I think the over is fine for them. But that over under is like perfect for them. I think that's the right line for them.
Right. Because they went 5-7 last year and got to a bowl game as a 5-7 team. And that was coming off of consecutive 9-4 seasons. And so the over under being 5.5, if you're not kind of building off of that, it's a tough spot. So number 11 pick, back to Cam.
Oh, I'm going to go Washington, and I have concerns about Washington, but I think we're kind of at the point where, like, in this power rank, where, like, you like a part of the team, but you have concerns about the rest of the team.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about the trenches. I question how Washington is going to do in the Big Ten with some of the off the line issues they have. I really like Will Rogers, the quarterback. I thought he was great at Mississippi State in sophomore or junior year. I think if they can kind of get him back to that, they should be fine. I know they lost a lot of talent, obviously changed the head coach, but I think they have talent coming up, just some inexperience. My biggest question for them is just going to be the offensive line. And it's going to be a question I think I have with a lot of these Pac-12 teams. UCLA is going to be far down, I think, but all of our boards. I think their offensive line is a major question as well. But this is not going to be the same Washington team that we saw in the semis last year.
No, they lost like everybody.
Exactly. I don't think anyone expects them to be that. But I think they have a good core. I think if they can get Will Rogers back to his sophomore, junior year level, I think they could be in an okay spot.
Yeah, I mean, remember, Will Rogers is the all-time leading passer in SEC history. Like, this dude has thrown a lot of passes. And so keeping him after he went in the portal after the changes is good. It's something to build off of. And I think if you look at what Jedd Fisch did at Arizona, you can be optimistic in the next couple of years he'll get it going based on how he rebuilt Arizona. But it's just that first year at Arizona was rough, and that may be the case again here in Washington. So I like the long-term buy, but the schedule's tough as well, and it just may be a transition. I mean, it's rare to see a team lose so much from one year to another, but that's what Washington did. I know they played in the national championship. None of those guys are there anymore. It's kind of wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Washington had an issue. I mean, they lost, 10 or 11 to the NFL draft. Some first rounders, as we know, Penix and, Roma Dunze and several other really good players. And then when, Kalen DeBoer left, it just, then it was all, Katie bar the door as far as all the players that left and exited and went to Alabama and went, even losing somebody like Jabbar Muhammad to Oregon, a corner who's really good. Mm-hmm. And then, Jedd Fisch has stabilized it to some extent. He was lucky that Will Rogers decided he wanted to stay. I was worried about that for them. And then he brought in, a ton from Arizona to kind of help, reshape that a little bit. You're trying to build everything together on the fly. and then you throw on a schedule like this. This is why I didn't have them, even though maybe talent-wise and certainly long-term, I have them much higher than maybe this position. But this is why I didn't have them above Minnesota, is because you look at their schedule and what they have to do and what, where they go from like their last 8 games at Rutgers, across the country, to a really physical team. That's going to be a tough place to play. Michigan at home, that say no more. At Iowa City, not an easy place to play. At Indiana, maybe a little lighter there, but USC at home, at Penn State, UCLA at home, at Oregon. Not a lot of wins there. I mean, I think getting to 6-6 would be quite the accomplishment based on that schedule, even with that kind of talent, because building cohesion on the fly against some of these teams and some of this travel, I think could really be a challenge for this team.
Yeah. All right, I've got pick number 12, and I'm going to go with UCLA, the last of the Pac-12 teams to move over. And it's an interesting move. Chip Kelly leaves for the offensive coordinator job at Ohio State, one of the strangest coaching moves we've ever seen in modern college football history. But I think UCLA on the whole is going to be better for it. Chip Kelly didn't like recruiting, didn't like where the modern game was at. He just wanted to coach ball, and NIL was a bit of an issue for UCLA. So they bring in Deshaun Foster, who was the running backs coach and had just left, and now comes back to be the head coach. And he specifically has done a really good job there. UCLA had a running back drafted in 4 straight NFL drafts until this past year, when they had Carson Steele go undrafted. But they've got TJ Harden back at running back, and UCLA had been one of the best rushing teams in the Pac-12 the last couple of years. So like what Chip Kelly was doing there was working. It was kind of in the pass game where they were really having some issues. So like UCLA, they still got talent there. They got a coach who will bring talent in a way I think Chip Kelly didn't bring in. And they'd kind of gotten over the hump to be like a pretty solid team under Chip Kelly. And I think Deshaun Foster has the chance to continue that. Scott, what do you think of UCLA?
I'm probably going to disagree with you a little bit here. I think this could be a really rough year for them. Losing the players that they lost. I thought Dante Moore was going to be kind of a star for UCLA, and then going to Oregon to basically be a backup this year, I thought was a little bit of a wild move. And then losing Kamari Ramsey, who I think is a really good safety across town, and losing their DC, of course, to USC, and that happened before. But then I think you look at their schedule specifically for this year, and I'm not talking big term, but if they're going at LSU, Oregon at home, at Penn State, then they play Minnesota, which can be a tough out, at Rutgers, then they finish up at Nebraska, Iowa at home, at Washington, and USC. I think this could be a really difficult year for UCLA to get things going. I mean, Ethan Garbers is, he was kind of a off and on kind of quarterback last year. I like TJ Harden a lot, and I think Deshaun Foster kind of stabilized the program. Some of the players that did hit the portal came back. There were several late that did it, and that was really important for them. And when we're talking 2026 or 27, I could have a different view, but I just think this year might be a real struggle for them.
Yeah, their over-under win total was only 4.5, but we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel here, so we're going to have some pretty low win totals for a lot of these remaining teams. Right. Cam?
Yeah, no, I agree with Scott. I think they're going to struggle this year. Like I said, I have a question about the offensive line, but that schedule is brutal. I mean, like that. I just don't know how. I mean, you're talking about going to LSU, Oregon, Penn State, Rutgers, Nebraska, Iowa, USC. I think those are all losses for UCLA. I just don't. I like the future for them. I agree with you. I think it was time for Chip Kelly to move on there. I think you're talking about, especially in this area, you have to want to recruit and you have to want to deal with boosters to do NIL. Chip Kelly didn't want to do that stuff. So it was time. I think Foster will be good for them going forward, but I think it's going to be a rough first year for him. They have to change a few things to build it back up, I think.
Yeah. All right, I've got the 13th pick here as well, and this one may be also kind of more of a long-term buy, but Michigan State, who hired Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, I think it was a really, really good hire, the exact type of fit they want. It's probably going to take a couple years to get to where he needs to get them to, but he brings the mindset that they need. Jim Mahalchik, the offensive line coach they got, really good coach. They have to be better there. They also brought in Aiden Childs, who I think is going to be kind of the X factor for this team. Highly touted former 4-star recruited Oregon State. Comes in, he's going to be the guy at quarterback there, and it's good to have that familiarity that will help the growth. Schedule's tough. There's a 4-game stretch in the middle that they got to just like survive. That stretch is Ohio State at home, Oregon on the road, then a bye, Iowa at home, Michigan on the road. Those 4 are going to be rough. But outside of that, everything else is doable. Florida Atlantic, Maryland, Prairie View, Boston College, Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers. Like Rutgers is probably the best of that bunch. But like you can see 6 wins on the schedule, I think, if things work out. They did lose a couple of guys at the end of the last portal cycle. That was pretty rough, especially on the defensive line. So there will be adjustments to make, but I do like the upside of Michigan State. What do you think, Scott?
I think they're in a really tough spot this year. I like the long term. I think Jonathan Smith was a great hire for them, one of the best in the country this year in this cycle. I like Aiden Childs. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. I like Jack Velling, who they brought from Oregon State, one of the better tight ends in the country. And then, retaining Cal Halliday on defense, I think will stabilize some things. But they also had 47 players enter the portal since everything happened in the middle of last year, and that's just so much. I mean, you're turning over, more than 50% of your roster, and you're bringing in guys, some talented. They lost a lot of really talented players too. I think that 4-game stretch, they can't let that define their season, because if they go over, which they very well could and probably should,
probably
it's
will.
more about the other games. Yeah. But it's more about, can they beat Indiana at home? Can they go to Illinois and win? What happens at the end of the year against Rutgers? Are they going to be competitive in that game? And how about at Maryland? I think they've got the opportunity. Where I'm not as sold on UCLA, I am a little more sold on Michigan State in building a more cohesive team to be competitive at the end of the year. And I'm not there that they're going to get to a bowl game, but I'm there that they're going to get to being a team that you look at in late November and go, yeah, this is starting to look like what we want it to look like, and it'll propel them going forward. So while they'll be 4-8, 5-7, I think in the future they're going to look the part as a team that we kind of expected from Michigan State over the years to be a competitive program.
Yeah, their over-under is 5 wins. And like you said, they got to survive that middle part of the schedule, because under Mel Tucker, especially last year, the problem with the program was something would go wrong and it would just snowball. They blew a game against Rutgers last year, completely let that game slip away because of some turnovers and special teams plays. Those are the types of losses they can't have happen under Jonathan Smith. And I think he's going to try to make sure that they don't. Cam, the Michigan State, Ohio State games, you've seen a few. They have not been competitive whatsoever. What do you think about Michigan State?
The last time Ohio State went up to Michigan State, I think Michigan State got a pick 6 off C.J. Stroud, and they were up 7-0. And I remember that place going crazy. And then Marvin Harrison scored 4 touchdowns, and then they left. And it was, I think the thing for this program is it's the future for them. I think kind of going off what you said, Chris, is when things went wrong under Mel Tucker, like they went real wrong. It just seemed like one thing happened and then the sky was falling. I think this has to be a year where they kind of focus on dealing with the adversity, fighting through that adversity in that middle of the season. And then if they can turn it around a little bit toward the end of the year, you look to build more momentum into the spring, the transfer portal, and then build it into next year. I think it's a 4 or 5 win team, but it's how they trend at the end of the year that's important, I think, for the Spartans.
All right, Cam, back to you for pick number 14.
Yeah, I kind of bounced around between 2 teams. I'm going to go with Maryland here. Losing Tagovailoa is tough. There were some times where I think in some ways they may be a little bit better off, just because he made some bad decisions sometimes. I just like the stuff that just make you scratch your head and like, what are you doing? You're too good to do this. So they'll have questions at quarterback, but hopefully they can cut down some of the turnovers. But I think they're going to be pretty solid on defense. And then their schedule is not terrible. They don't have Ohio State or Michigan, but they do have to go to Oregon and go to Penn State. That'll be tough. But I look at them on defense, and I think this team can be really good. Well, I won't say really good, but good enough to carry them, I think, to potentially a bowl game. And then, I mean, I'm a Bowling Green guy, so they went and got Jalen Husky. I was all on board. So I think I think defense is the key for them this year. If that can keep them in games, I think they can have a pretty good year.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Roman Hemby, the running back as well. He can do a lot out of the backfield. Had more than 1,200 yards 2 years ago. He'll probably be a greater kind of focal point of that offense this year. They built that. Well, Mike Locksley's built that program into a very solid, like 7-8 win team the last couple of years. But losing your all-time leading passer in Talia, is he the Big Ten's all-time leading passer as well? Did he break that record? I think it was or past Curtis Painter. I don't
He's in
remember
that
if he did
category.
Yeah,
He's up
yeah,
there.
yeah. Their over under win total is 6.5. What do you think, Scott?
I would probably go under, but I do think that they are capable of going over. And I mean, when you look at first of all, I think MJ Morris is going to be as impactful for this team as any of the teams striving for bowl eligibility, because can he come in and replace, Tagovailoa? And as Cam said, I saw him play really well. And then, the one game I saw him in person, he threw 6 interceptions and they got brutalized. And this is kind of been the hallmark of Maryland, the game that I went to, kind of microcosm. They were 4-0, had almost a sellout. It was a blackout at, in College Park. And then they lose 51-17 and throw 6 interceptions.
God, I remember that game.
Like,
that game was awful.
Yeah. And, and when you look at the front part of their schedule, they're more than capable of getting into that ballpark. I mean, UConn, Michigan State, they go to old rival Virginia, Villanova at Indiana, Northwestern at home. They've got a schedule that's conducive for them being very competitive and winning those games. The back half is much more difficult, but their defense, I like the way Mike Locksley has built this, and I wasn't sure he was going to be able to do this. So I've been pleasantly surprised that they've been more competitive and playing well. They've made mistakes in the past, and now they've cut some of those down. But the key for them is, in that 6-game stretch, can they go minimum 5-1, and then can they knock off a team or two, a Penn State, a Minnesota, maybe even an Iowa or Rutgers, and build something. So it's okay. We're 7-5. We beat a couple of good teams, and we weathered this storm too. So, the other thing I'll add is that in the past, kind of like with Michigan State, they really relied heavily on the portal. This time around, they didn't have to, and they didn't lose a lot of guys in the portal. They lost a few, but not enough to really make a difference. So I like kind of the direction Maryland's heading, and staying kind of floating along, but I'd probably put them a little bit under. I just don't know that I'm sold that they're going to get there.
All right, coming down the home stretch here. Got 4 teams left. Scott, you've got 2 picks here now.
Okay, I'm going to go with the team that produced the Big Ten Coach of the Year last year, and that was the Northwestern Wildcats. And they're picked pretty low, and I think I'm a little surprised by that. They played really well last year. I thought they would be a 1-11 team at best because of everything that happened with Pat Fitzgerald, and instead David Braun comes in, really galvanizes them, puts them in a position to be successful, and they win close games. And they picked up, to me, who I think is going to be one of the we got to spot some of these guys that are, young coordinators, and then in 4 or 5 years, everybody's going to want them. And I think Zach Lujan is going to be that guy. He came from South Dakota State. He's really young. I mean, he's like 29 or 30 years old, but I think he's more than capable of being the next big thing, and maybe not necessarily at Northwestern, but somewhere else. The challenges that they're going to face. I mean, quarterback Brendan Sullivan, who started 6 games for them, hit the portal, and then now is a backup at Iowa. So they got to find a decent quarterback. I like Cam Porter as a running back. He's tough. He's physical. Yeah. And I asked Brendan about it a few weeks ago. Right now, it's Mike Wright or Jack Lausch. I mean, they've got some guys, but nobody that stands out. They've got some defensive players that I think are pretty good. And the other thing is that they're playing at basically a makeshift practice field as their stadium. 15,000 people there. And granted, late in the year when they play Illinois and play Ohio State, they're going to move to Wrigley, and they probably should do the same thing with Wisconsin at least move it to, they could move that to the White Sox park now because there's no way they're playing in October. So they need to do something there, because I just can't imagine that much red, not being able to get in that game. But I do like David Braun. I like the way he coached. It might be they're in that 5 to 6 win range. They've got a decent schedule, but quarterback is something they just have to figure out.
Yeah, the schedule is favorable. Again, I mean, they've got Iowa and Michigan on the road and Ohio State at home. But other than that, very doable. Again, I mean, it's hard for me to be like, nah, they're not going to be good because they completely defied our expectations last year, like 100% in a very, very difficult situation. For David Braun, who's never been a head coach before, he joined the team that off season, becomes a head coach, and they have that season. It's pretty ridiculous here. So, we'll see. You couldn't not, when this job came open and Pat Fitzgerald got fired, people wondered, hey, does Northwestern take a big swing? You've got a lot of Big Ten money. People want Big Ten jobs. They've got that gorgeous practice facility. There could be a pretty decent pool for that job. But you couldn't not hire David Braun after what he did last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, we'll see if he follows that up. It's a little bit different than the Zach Arnett situation, but I'm curious, if they stumble and have a terrible, 3-9 type of season, does Northwestern maybe try to stem that and go in another direction quickly like Mississippi State did when Zach Arnett replaced Mike Leach, but got fired a year later. So we'll see, but that schedule is pretty easy. What do you think, Cam?
Yeah, my thing, two things with Northwestern. I like their defense. I do have questions about quarterback. I think the thing for me with last year was, I think 8 wins obviously was just, that blew everybody's mind, but there were a lot of close wins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are tough to predict going into the next year, especially when you have questions of quarterback. So I would love to see how they develop there. I do think they're going to be pretty sound on the other side of the ball, though. And although I wonder if all the stuff going on in the stadium will affect the team at all, I think playing at Wrigley will be sweet.
Yeah, the over-under is 5 for Northwestern. So we'll see. People not exactly believing them, but they didn't last year. Scott, I think we're on your last pick here, number 16.
Yeah, we're 16. Yeah. I'm going to go with what I've kind of christened as the basketball Bermuda Triangle of the Big Ten here. Illinois, Purdue, and Indiana. And among the three, I'm going to go with Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a shame a little bit that Illinois is down here. A few years ago, there seemed to be some real momentum with Brett Bielema as the head coach. They won like 8. They won 8 games. They were right in contention to win the Big Ten West title, and almost beat Michigan, and then kind of fell apart. And the thing was, they had an outstanding defense 2 years ago. It was one of the best in the country, led statistical categories. But those were a lot of Lovie Smith's guys that Brett and his staff coached up. And when you lose your DC and ends up going over to Purdue to be the head coach, and you got some issues there. And so I think with Illinois this year, I really like Caden Fagan, who's going to be their main running back. He's a big guy, reminds me a lot of Braden Allen. They're going to play big boy ball. They need to establish an identity. And defensively, they got a few other players. Gabe Yakus is a really good pass rusher. And then finally at quarterback, Luke Altmaier could be decent there as well. I just, they've got a schedule that they can navigate to a bowl season or a decent season, but they've found ways, I don't know, for the last 100 years to lose games they shouldn't lose. And there are those games on the schedule. I mean, after, Kansas at home, last year they got blown out. They play them at home this year. Last year was in Lawrence. At Nebraska and Penn State back-to-back. They go to Oregon. They play Michigan and then there are the other games, at Northwestern, at Rutgers that you look at and you go, they got a chance. No, we don't know. That's even matchup. So I'm not sold that Illinois is going to get back to a bowl game. And I think that they've got to do some soul searching And it's really strange because I think Brett's a really good coach, but it's just not, the trajectory isn't as high or as good as I thought it would be.
Yeah. All right, we got 2 picks left now. Cam, you got two teams from the same state to decide between. Which fan base do you want to upset?
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go Purdue here. I really like Ryan Walters. I think he's taken over defensive play calling all year. I know he took it over midway through the season last year. I think he's really smart mind on that side of the ball. I know they have a ton of new players. I think in his Big Ten media presser, he said they have 37 new players. That's a lot to mesh. But I think it comes down to Hudson Card at quarterback. How he grows will be important for them. I don't know. I don't think they're going to be a bowl team. I just don't think they're going to be the worst team in the Big Ten. That's kind of where I'm at right now, especially as we get down to the bottom of this list. And I think as they're going to have to match a lot of people, but I think Ryan Walters can trend this program in the right direction this year if they can get to even just 5 wins. I think that'd be a big step for them.
Yeah, I think they'll be better defensively than they were. Ryan Walters is a good defensive coach. He's going into his 2nd season as a head coach there, formerly the DC at Illinois. I think I would have picked them last, and I'll just get into when it's my turn, I'll take the last team available. But Scott, what do you think?
This is a tough year for them, and they lost a lot in the portal. And it was one thing for the teams with first-year coaches, Indiana, Michigan State, and a few others to lose that many. But for Purdue in its 2nd year and the players they lost, Nick Scorton, that was a killer. He was a really good edge rusher, and for him to go to A&M was a killer for them. But I think some of the players they got, they're probably glad that left. I think they're glad they left. But when you look at their schedule, it's going to be very challenging for them to get to a bowl game. I mean, Notre Dame at home in week 2. Then they go to Oregon State, which that's a far trip. And then, the Nebraska at Wisconsin, and later on Oregon, at Ohio State, Penn State. Those are some really tough games. And so for Purdue, progress to me is how do you compete with the teams in your tier, which would be, of course, Indiana, Michigan State, Illinois, right now, and then can you knock off Northwestern possibly? Could you knock off another team and squeeze into that range? I think if they could get to a bowl game for Ryan Walters in year 2, be fantastic. I'm not sure I get by it. They have some good players, and he's a really good coach, and I think they're going to build a decent defense if they can keep it. But losing that many players in the portal really sours me on their prognosis.
Yeah. All right, so I'll take the last pick here, and I'm kind of surprised this team came in at 18th in this draft, but I'll take them. Indiana Hoosiers, first-year coach Curt Cignetti. I'm a big fan of him. I think that was a great hire. He's never had a losing season in 13 years as a head coach. He's won everywhere he's been, and he brings in Curtis Rourke, the quarterback from Ohio, a former All-MAC player. He brought in several All-Sun Belt players with him from James Madison. And he's talking a big game in a way that Curt Cignetti does, and a lot of people who didn't follow him at James Madison or his earlier stops. He's brash, he's blunt, he is fueled by your hatred, and he will be fueled by the disrespect he's been getting on this podcast with his team coming in last year. Again, it's going to be tough. Obviously, they lost. They had a lot of turnover. It's a program that has not been very good, but the schedule is doable. You got Michigan and Ohio State, but everything else, the non-conference is FIU, Western Illinois, Charlotte, and you throw in UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern, Washington, Nebraska, Michigan State. I don't know. I think this team could overachieve. The over-under for Indiana is, I had it right here, it's 5.5. That's pretty high for a team that's coming up last in this draft. So I don't know if I'd necessarily for sure take that over, but I wouldn't be surprised if they hit 6 wins and get to a bowl game in Cignetti's first season. What do you think, Scott?
I don't know that I would go that far. I like Cignetti, and it's really interesting. I mean, they've grabbed 12 or 13 former players from James Madison, so he's leaning into that. He's brash. that's interesting in Indiana, a place that hasn't been really interesting. I mean, Tom Allen loved each other and did all that. And that worked well for a year, and then it faded away.
It went from love each other to hate everybody else. That's what their new thing is, apparently.
Exactly. Now we hate everybody, and and says bad words about all these teams, and I'm like, you might want to beat one of them once in a decade or so. But I mean the teams that they're one of two teams in the Big Ten, Ohio State being the other, that actually doesn't play a Power 5 or Power 4 conference team in the non-con. So that helps them get to 3. The other teams, there's a lot of them on there that, again, they're kind of in their quadrant. Can they beat them? They had a lot of turnover, and I think some of it was, I don't know, I maybe it's speculative, but was it more, if you want to leave, you can go ahead and leave. There were a lot of those players too. And, but I do look at Indiana as, I think Cignetti, if he can be interesting and win some games, then I think Indiana's on, it really made a great hire, and he certainly got us talking about him. And I think that's step number 1.
Yeah. Cam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think football at Indiana can be good under Kurt. I think they have. I love what he did to James Madison. I think him bringing so many players over is going to be good for them. I think it's a future thing for them. I don't think they're in a bowl. It's similar to Purdue. I think I've just flipped a coin on who I was going to pick the second last spot, but I don't think they're a bowl team. I think the future there can be very bright. He has the personality. He has the coaching staff behind him, and I think he's going to recruit really well. Because I think you can recruit really well in Indiana, especially if you win your state. I think keeping Ohio State and the Michigans of the world out of there is going to be tough, but if they can win in Indiana, I think they can have a chance to build themselves back up into a middle of the road, top half Big Ten team, I think.
All right, guys, we've gone through 18 teams. This is the largest college football conference since the Southern Conference of the 1920s that had like 20-something teams. So it really is a gigantic league. Real quick, let's run through some superlatives. First, we're going to go with we'll go through the rankings one more time. I'll recap this for everybody who listened all the way through it. Here's the order: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Iowa, Michigan, Nebraska, USC, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Minnesota. That's your top 10. Then Washington, UCLA, Michigan State, Maryland, Northwestern, Illinois, Purdue, Indiana. So that's the power rankings predictions draft that we came up with here. Now, real quick, we'll go through some superlatives as we wrap up this episode. Big Ten championship game predictions: who's going to be in the game, who's going to win the game. I'm going to go Ohio State, Oregon are in the game for a rematch from a regular season game, and I'm going to have Ohio State wins the game. Cam, what's your pick?
Yeah, I'm going same. Ohio State, Oregon. I think Ohio State loses in Eugene this year and then comes back and beats Oregon in Indianapolis.
Scott.
I'm going to go Ohio State, Penn State, because I think Oregon might slip up in one of those November games. Not to say I think Oregon's the second best team, but sometimes things happen. So I'm going to go Ohio State, Penn State, with Ohio State winning it.
All right. Offensive player of the year. I'm going to go with Oregon quarterback Dylan Gabriel. Cam, what's your pick?
Yeah, Chris, you're stealing on my picks. I'm going to go Dylan Gabriel as well. I think he's going to have a stellar year for the Ducks. I'm
gonna go a little different. I'm gonna go with Ohio State running back Quinshon Judkins. I think he and Travion Henderson. I could flip a coin over those two. Yeah. I think Judkins could have a 20 touchdown type of season.
All right, defensive player of the year. I'm gonna go with Penn State linebacker Abdul Carter. Cam, what's your pick?
Yeah, I'm just sick of picking the same as you. So I had Abdul Carter down, but I'm going to go Ohio State safety Caleb Downs. I think he's going to be so instrumental in how good they're going to be. So I think he's freshman All-American. I think we'll have a great year.
I'm going to go with the Iowa linebacker Jay Higgins. 171 tackles last year. I think he's in that same category. Now, if Abdul Carter has 15 sacks, I reserve the right to change my pick, or Will Johnson has 8 interceptions, but I'm going to go with Jay Higgins in that spot.
All right. Coach of the year, I'm going to go Matt Rule, because this award always goes to coaches who overachieve what people think. I think if Nebraska gets to 8 wins, like I think is possible, I think he'll get a lot of attention. And I'm going to say Matt Rule, Coach of the Year. Cam.
Yeah, I'm gonna go the same. I think Nebraska's gonna be really good this year. I didn't want to switch this one up. I thought about going Kirk Ferentz because I think Iowa's gonna be in the playoff, but I think Matt Rule, especially with how much better they're gonna be than they were a year ago, I think he'll get the award.
Well, I think if Iowa makes the playoff, I do think Kirk wins the award. Scott, what's your pick?
That would be his fifth. It would be pretty impressive. But I think I'm going to go with the first ever Ohio State coach to actually win the Hayes Schembechler Award. It's never happened before. And that's going to be Ryan Day. Because I think if you can run the table, which I think they're capable of doing, and beating Iowa, Oregon, Penn State, Nebraska, and Michigan in that year, then I think you're more than deserving of winning that award. And I know everybody expects Ohio State to be good, but sometimes the best coach coaches the best team. And I'm going to go with Ryan Day.
Ryan Day, he did win Big Ten Coach of the Year in 2019, which is hilarious that Ohio State had not won that award since 1979. They went 40 years between winning Big Ten Coach of the Year. 5 different Illinois coaches won that award in that span. Ohio State had won 17 Big Ten championships in that span and never had won a Coach of the Year award. Because, again, this award in the Big Ten historically comes down to expectations and what people are thinking. Last one here.
Let me add that the coach, the Hayes Schembechler, is actually by the coaches and the Dave McLean's by the media. So that way I'm not wrong.
There you go. Last one, dark horse. So I guess it'd be someone someone who's not a favorite to win the conference or finish very high who does. I'm going to go Nebraska again because I picked him pretty high. I picked Matt Rule Coach of the Year, so I think Nebraska ends up being the team that surprises. Maybe they win, 9 games or something like that, or they get into the Big Ten title conversation when we're in November. So I'm going to say Nebraska.
Yeah, I'm going to go Rutgers. I think they have a pretty favorable schedule. Like I said, defense is really, really good. I think Shannon State's trending really well out there.
I'm going to go with Wisconsin just for the sake of difference. I think they're going to be a better team this year. I do. I think they're going to be very competitive with a few of these teams. I could see them, say, upsetting Oregon late in the season at Camp Randall. So, maybe they're not going to be a playoff team, but I can see them get to 9 wins or something like that. And I think that really will speak well to what they're building in Madison.
All right, guys, we went long on this episode, but look, that's the Big Ten's fault. They decided to expand to 18 teams, and we wanted to make sure we hit to everybody. We will have more conference previews on this feed in the coming weeks as we get ready for college football season, and we'll get back into the swing of things in a routine when David Ubben returns from paternity leave. But thank you, everybody, for listening. Follow the podcast feed on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are back on YouTube. We fought to get it back online. It's there. So please follow the YouTube channel as well. Leave a voicemail, a text message to us on the Until Saturday phone line, and we'll answer it. That number is 316-462-9852. We're also taking questions on theathletic.com. There's a mailbag link up there as well. So for Scott, for Cam, everybody, thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.